What is sensory and motor mechanism? The sensory mechanism is responsible for processing sensory information, while the motor mechanism gives us the ability to respond on what we see, hear, touch, smell, and taste. So how does the sensory and motor mechanism work? The sensory neurons transmit impulses from a receptor, which is our senses, to the central nervous system, such as the spinal cord or the brain. And the motor neuron transmits impulses from the central nervous system to an effector, such as the muscles. So, yung sensory neurons po will transmit the information sa ating central nervous system, and then yung information po ay nare-receive ng ating senses, which is the sense of smell, sense of taste, sense of touch, sense of hearing, and sense of sight. And then after po niya matransmit yung information sa central nervous system, yung mga motor neurons naman po, kukuhanin nila yung information from the central nervous system and they will distribute it to the effector, which are the muscles. And dun po mangyayari yung reaction.
So now, let's talk about how sensory and motor mechanisms works in humans. Behavior is explained in terms of the firings of the neutral circuits between reception of the stimuli, which is the sensory input, and the movements of the muscles, which is the motor output. Siguro lahat naman tayo o karamihan sa atin ay naranasan na kung paano matinik sa isang cactus. And kapag nangyari yon, agad natin tinatanggal yung kamay natin or yung part ng katawan natin na tumama doon. Isa yon sa halimbawa ng sensory and motor mechanism. Pero paano nga ba siya nagwo-work? So, let's start. Pero bago tayo mag-proceed sa process, explain muna natin yung iba't ibang terms na nakikita nyo sa slide. First is yung stimulus or stimuli sa plural. Ito yung nagtitrigger sa isang organism upang mag-respond. Siguro lahat naman tayo familiar sa 5 senses, which is the sight, smell, taste, and touch. All of these senses have something in common, which is the sensory receptors. Sensory receptors detect changes in the environment. There are different types of sensory receptors, which is the chemoreceptors detect the presence of chemicals, thermoreceptors detect changes in temperature, mechanoreceptors detect mechanical forces, and the photoreceptors detect light during vision. Next, meron din tayong sensory neuron. These are the neurons that carry sensory impulse from sensory organs to the central nervous system. Next, we have relay neuron, found between sensory input and motor response, allow sensory and motor neurons to communicate. Next, motor neuron. These are the neurons that carry motor impulses from the central nervous system to specific effectors. So take note, yung sensory neurons, ito yung mga neurons na dinadala sa central nervous system. While yung motor neurons naman, ito yung mga neurons na nanggagaling sa central nervous system. Next is the brain, specifically the cerebral cortex. It is responsible for encoding sensory information and controlling motor behavior. So, ito yung example natin. Kapag natinik ka sa isang cactus, so yung stimulus dito ay yung tinik ng cactus dahil ito yung bagay na nag-trigger sa isang organism para mag-respond. Kapag tumama na siya sa ating sensory receptor, ay dagdag lang, meron tayong iba't ibang sensory receptors. Meron tayong eyes for vision, nose for smelling, tongue for tasting, ears for hearing, and the sense of touch for pain, temperature, and vibration. So, kapag yung tinik ng cactus, which is yung stimulus, tumama na siya sa sensory receptors, which is yung ating sense of touch, magsisend na siya ng signal papunta sa sensory neuron. So, yung sensory neuron, ito yung mga neurons na aakyat papunta sa central nervous system. Pero bago yan, dadaan muna siya sa relay neuron. Ito yung boundary ng sensory input and motor output. Kapag daan sa relay neuron, aakyat na siya sa ating cerebral cortex. So, kapag na-process na siya ng cerebral cortex, magsisend siya ng panibagong signal padaan uli sa relay neuron, which is yung boundary nga, patungo na sa motor neuron upang magbigay sa atin ng abilidad para mag-response physically sa bagay na nangyari. So, technically speaking, ang sensory natin ang nagbibigay sa atin ng abilidad para ma-sense and perceive ang ating kapaligiran. While yung motor naman ang nagbibigay sa atin ng abilidad upang mag-response physically sa bagay na nangyari.
So next, how does the sensory and motor mechanism work in animals?
Animals' behavior explain the terms of the firing of the neural circuits between the reception and the stimuli movements of the muscle motor output according to physiologists and animals' behavior are special purpose adaptation. The response of the animals depends on what they sense on environment. Ang pag-uugali daw po ng mga animals ay ipinapaliwanag sa mga tuntunin ng pagputok ng mga neural circuits sa pagitan ng pagtanggap ng mga stimuli ng mga sensory neurons ng mga animals sa paggalaw ng mga kamanlan ng motor output. Ayon sa psychologist, ang mga pag-uugali ng mga hayop na ito ay special na layunin ng pagpababagay na tugon ng mga hayop na nakasalalay sa kung ano ang kanilang nadarama sa kanilang kapaligiran.
Sensory abilities of animals is very important to its behavior. All actions such as body movements, detection of objects of interest, etc. begins with the acquisition of information. They constitute a set of monitoring instruments with which the animals gather information. After gathering the information, the animals will respond with one particular energy. For example, these meerkats, nasa-sense nila yung predator through body movement. So, yung reaction nila, tinatakot nila yung predator or nagkukupola sila para umalis yung predator.
How does the sensory and motor mechanism work in plants? Plants are rooted in place and must respond to the surrounding environmental factors. Plants have sophisticated systems to detect and respond to light, gravity, temperature, and physical touch. Receptors sense environmental factors and relay the information to effector system, often through chemical messengers, to bring out the plant responses.
So, plants have no brain or central nervous system, which means they can't feel anything. But even though plants don't have nervous system, they can respond to stimuli. So, this process is called tropisms. Tropisms is the turning of all or part of an organism in a particular direction in response to an external stimulus. So, familiar naman siguro tayo sa auxin, which is the plant hormone which allows plants to possess a sense of direction. So, along with other several chemicals found in plants, it is responsible for plant tropisms, which means movement or growth towards or away from a stimulus. So, there are different kinds of tropisms, which is the positive tropism and the negative tropism. Positive tropism means growth or movement towards a stimulus, while the negative tropism is a growth or movement away from a stimulus. So there are different stimulus that plant can react to includes light, gravity, water, touch, chemicals, and temperature. Each of these stimuli has its own tropism and plants can grow with positive or negative tropism.
And here are the most common type of tropisms.
Phototrophism, the growth and development of plants in response to sunlight. The plant senses the sunlight and it responds by growing towards the sunlight or the other way to around.
One great example of phototropism po ay ang sunflower. So, bakit nga ba great example siya ng phototropism? So, as we all know, yung sunflower po, habang tumutubo siya, nag-face po yung flower dun sa sun. So, nasa-sense po kasi ng sunflower yung sun, kaya dun po siya tumutubo. In response, tumutubo po siya paharap sa sun. So, kaya po siya tumutubo paharap sa sun is because of the high concentration ng auxin. Kaya po, yung stem is nagbe-bend papunta dun or paharap dun sa sun.
Gravitropism, or also known as geotropism. It is the process wherein the plant senses the gravity and in response the gravity pulls the plant and it goes toward it. Usually plants that are planted lower undergo on this process. So basically it is a plant growth related to gravity. It is a differential growth by a plant in response to gravity pulling on it. This is important when plants are first emerging from their seeds. So there are two types of gravitropism, the positive gravitropism and the negative gravitropism. So the positive gravitropism, it helps the roots grow downward towards the pole of gravity, while the negative gravitropism helps the stem grow upward against the pole of gravity. How does the plant senses gravity? So plants have special cells called statocytes. It is located at the very tips of their roots. Stato meaning balance and site meaning cell, which can sense gravity. Statocytes are cells to be involved in gravitropic perception in plants, located in the cap tissue of the roots. They contain statolites. Statolites are dense amyloplast organelles that synthesize and store starch involved in the perception of gravity. Hydrotropism, the growth of plants in relation to the water. It is a growth in relation to concentration of water. There are two types of hydropism, the positive and negative hydrotropism. Positive hydrotropism causes plant roots to grow toward saturated soil in order to collect water for the plant. But there is also such a thing as having too much water. Plant roots can actually drown in oversaturated soil. So negative hydrotropism causes roots to grow into drier soils. Thigmotropism, the growth of plants in response to physical touch. When parts of a plant encounter a solid object, they demonstrate thigmotropism. So there are two types of thigmotropism, the positive and negative thigmotropism. Positive thigmotropism can be seen when a climbing vine wraps itself around a solid object as it grows. And negative thigmotropism is exhibited by roots growing away from or around rocks in the soil.
Here are some other types of tropism. The chemotropism, which is the growth of plants in response to chemical substance. The traumatropism, which is the growth of plants in response to wound lesion. The electropism, which is the growth of plants in response to electrical current. So here are some examples of plants, which is the makahiya plant and also the Venus flytrap. Growing up, we are fascinated po about how the makahiya plant fold kapag hinahawakan natin siya. So bakit nga ba siya nag-fold pag hinahawakan natin siya? The makahiya plant folds kasi iniingatan niya po yung sarili niya or pinoprotect niya po yung sarili niya sa danger. So, pag nahawakan po natin yung plant, nasa-sense niya po yun, and then, in reaction or in response, nag-fold po siya to protect itself from danger. So, yung Venus flytrap po is a kind of carnivorous plant and it eats insects. So, paano po siya nag-work? Pag po may papalapit na prey sa kanya, nasa-sense niya po yun using yung mga red natusok-tusok po dun sa bibig ng Venus flytrap. So, in response, it will close or it will eat the prey po. So, ganun yung nangyayari.